it's truly an honor to be working with Paul, and just to give you a bit of context, this has been a brilliant collaboration between Northumbria University and Vane. This is part of our effort to not only increase opportunities for our students, but also to connect with the larger contemporary art scene in Newcastle and Gateshead. And so this is the first of those efforts, and we hope this is something that we continue to grow upon. The first assemblage, which is this entire program that kind of contains this exhibition as well, is focusing on body and politics, and doing so very broadly, because we want to kind of not only think about physical bodies, but also bodies of water, which is something that's going to be coming up tomorrow. In this show, we have Sunil Gupta, we have Charan Singh, we have Stuart Linden, we have Phyllis, Christopher, and Tessa Boffin. And all of the artists who are with us, they will be able to share at different points, because we wanted to make discourse accessible in a variety of formats during the 3 days that we'll be participating in this assemblage program. And so tonight we have Sunil Gupta and Charan, who will be speaking a bit about her work, both of them incredibly accomplished artists and truly a privilege to have here. So I'll just hand over to Sunil. This work that's in the show actually was commissioned for my doctoral project in 2020 during COVID for what was known as Chapter 2, The Dark Room of Mythological Migrations. And it's a conversation with Celine Kidbai, who's a dear friend of Sunil. So over to you.
Oh, okay.
I mean, do you want me to say more?
No, that's fine. Once I start, I can't be stopped.
I mean, but this is meant to be informal. It's not meant to be a talk.
No.
It's meant to be a very informal talk, conversation in the opening.
Oh, well, so, yeah, as Abdullah said, this was made in response to a program that he put together that was exclusively online. And I just found myself in a moment where several things seemed to be in the air. I found throughout my working life that thematic topics and ideas arrive from God knows where, but they kind of float around certain geographies, certain groups of people, certain networks of people. So basically, cruising was in the air. That's how I met Fiona over there. And it came up in various cities, in various guises. At the same time, India has been very much part of my personal brief, my project, my art historical project, to put Indian gaze into art history somehow, because when I arrived in the early 80s, there were none, and so I thought that can't be possible. And so it's a project that seems to not have an end. I've made gay work since I began, and I can't seem to grow out of that either. So unnamed people have said, maybe you should grow out of it. It's time to kind of move on or something more universal. But it's interesting, what we talked earlier. So I came out of an identity politics time anyway, where, women did women's work, and blacks did black work, and gay and lesbians did gay and lesbian work. Some of the consequences we see here, Tessa Boffin. And then it went into this other phase where people said, oh, I just want to be an artist. I don't want to be a woman artist or a gay artist, right? But I've just come back from New York, where identity politics is like everywhere. If you misrepresent somebody, if you dare quote something, and all of that, it's sort of become impossible. We're shooting new portraits.
But I was going to jump in and say that, what's interesting about what you say and your journey is that when you came to this country, at that time you were black. And then you,
no, I wasn't.
But you said that you said that at that time Yes, so go on, tell us.
I came as a Canadian.
You came
No, I came as, well, I wasn't Canadian, I was Indian. I wasn't sure that I was Indian Canadian or Canadian Indian, which way around it should work. No, then I became Asian here, but I didn't choose that. Everyone else thought I was Asian.
Right.
But later when I became black, all the Asians said, but you're not black, you're Asian. So then I went to New York to talk at a conference. They said, you're not black either. So black didn't travel very well, but it did serve us a particular purpose in the mid-80s of gathering under a post-colonial umbrella. Black was shorthand for post-colonial. It wasn't a skin color. I think unfortunately, Black Lives Matter has put paid to that. It's become skin color once again. So again, we've become the other colors. And we're not sure. So suddenly now, the latest thing is that you're South Asian, which means that the poor Pakistanis get a look in. I'm sorry. So now we've become brothers.
Yes.
Although we can't visit each other.
Yes. I mean, it's a divided region, but yeah, lots of things to talk about there. But I think that is really one of the objectives of having your voice in this show.
Yeah.
Because I wanted to definitely complicate the conversation on queerness and expand that, not only from an intersectional lens, but to think about the complicated.
So in terms of cruising, and when I was living in Delhi, and I wasn't when I made this, but I had lived in Delhi, so that's partly why Delhi re-entered the frame. And then I was on, what was it called? I think it was called Guys for Men. It was pre-phone apps, the kind of internet dating. And so there were a lot of guys from Lahore on our side, on the chatting. So the Delhi and the Lahore ones seemed very keen to have hot sex now, capital letters, but it was really kind of impossible. Briefly it was possible, and so there's a lot of sexual fantasy about the border. I talk about borderlands also, but as it happens, my best buddy in India was this guy, Salim Kidwai, who was a gay man who was a historian of medieval Islamic history, well, of Delhi, in fact. And I lived next to the tomb of a Mughal emperor. And I'd grown up with taking all that for kind of granted, and it was just part of the scene. It also provided, it's in the pictures here and there, a fantastic cruising ground. Because Mughal tombs have big gardens surrounding them, and quite a lot of walls with cavities and all of that. So they're like fabulous cruising places. And so we just thought that we would reminisce, because we are now, this is just a few years ago, where a lot of our physical spaces have been pretty much destroyed by Grindr and the internet. So people aren't going to them. And it's had a knock-on effect that our cruising grounds provided a physical basis for community. So if you imagine the people in this room, this kind of crowd would all be in this tomb trying to get laid at any particular time. And every Saturday I'd come and I'd see you all there. I may not have sex with all of you, but I kind of thought, oh yeah, that's so-and-so. And there he is in the red jacket yet again. So over time, I may go over to him and say, I don't know you, but I've heard there's some cops over there trying to, trap people. So slowly stuff, messaging and information and a kind of support group develops. And this is in stark contrast to people who are late 30s, early 40s in Delhi now who are on Grindr, report that they have a lot of sex, but they have zero community, and they can't find anyone because most of the sex involves several people, and obviously the drugs. Did you mention that? No.
I can't.
But
there was a lot mentioned in there that was scandalous, but I think that... But
sex and drugs is back big time in New York, London, Delhi, Bombay, all over, so it's like crossed all the borders.
I mean, I think one of the most shocking things in the video is probably that you and Salim talk about how you started cruising, or you were introduced to the world of cruising at a very young age.
Yes, can we say that?
Well, it was 10. It was 10, and I think that it's been mentioned in the video, and I remember showing this for the first time, and it was very shocking for the audiences. No one reacted because it was, online. There was very limited interactions, but I think that it is interesting, especially in relation to thinking about unlimited intimacy and thinking about how bareback sex has been talked about in relation to HIV/AIDS. But then also, what does it mean? When is the age of consent for a sexual encounter that is illegal in that context at any age? And so how do you navigate that? How would anyone come into that age of consent? How would anyone kind of know what is right or wrong? And so it's a very complicated conversation that, it's not an easy one. And I think that it's there. It happened, it existed, and I don't think that, things are different in India now, so.
Well, yeah, I tell you what happened to me anyway, is that I grew up in a scenario where nobody talked about sex of any kind. The school didn't talk about it, the family didn't talk about it. The people I had sex with didn't talk about it. Nobody talked about it. There was zero conversation about it. The thing didn't even have a name. I'd have heard of gay, so I came to Canada. And I realized, what I do is called gay. I didn't know that. Nobody had said that. And so that was one thing, absence of any discussion. And then there was this, and of course there was no pubs or bars or anything. So basically, Indian social life all happens inside big extended families, and their main feature is a wedding. And so at the wedding, most Indian kids pick out an uncle, I did, who was going to service them at any age. And this is a great unspoken, nobody speaks about it. Most Indian...
Don't look at me.
A lot of Indians of my age had their initial sexual experiences within the great Indian extended family. I, on the other hand, because I was interested in men, look out of my window, and after a certain hour in India, and I'm sure in Pakistan too, all the women are at home, all you see is men. You walk out of your house and it's like men everywhere, just hanging out. And sure enough, at a very early age, I realized where the sex happened, and it happens in the picture, with the places in the pictures, which was just a stone's throw from my house, which was extremely handy. And but the positive news that I was getting at the time was that I wasn't harassing girls. See, any thought of doing anything with a girl was completely forbidden and super negative and to be suppressed. So I thought, as long as I'm just giving somebody a blow, I think I would be nice with putting it, just giving someone a blowjob, a male, that was fine. And I went to this Catholic school, which also was giving some similar sounding messaging. As long as it wasn't a vagina involved, it was fine.
You're a good boy.
So I was a good boy. I was a virgin in there. And in my mind, I was still a virgin. So I hadn't seen a vagina yet. And so I was fine. So I didn't feel like, what I'm trying to say in a nutshell is that I hadn't heard of homophobia either. So the pleasure of South Asia at that moment was, because it wasn't talked about, there was no consequent homophobia. What's happened now is, now we've become legal, we've got homophobia.
So that brings us also into Charan's work, where with legality and also shifting spaces, shifting communities, because of course, you had a gay male experience in India, but then you're kind of looking at it in a much more pluralistic lens and kind of expanding that, especially in this work.
Yeah, I think Sunil had laid out this whole scenario, but I think what he didn't mention is that because in India is also, at least in certainly in his generation, that the wedding, marriages used to happen much at a very early age. So I think that way also, very often people also didn't thought of themselves that they are doing something wrong by having involved in indulging in same sex per se. Right now we have a lot of conversations, what is the age of consent and all those other kind of things. But I think the other things that happen also, that since similar to the gay context, the AIDS narrative is also very much about the US, so every second story of AIDS starts in somewhere in America. So this video that is in the exhibition was commissioned by Visual Aids, who have been working with AIDS and art context for 30 years, and this year in 2020 they were expanding those narratives, asking other people, looking for other people in different parts of the world to respond to AIDS narrative. And that's why one of the things that came out, I replied, and they were very keen into this particular community in South Asia, which is Kothis and Hijras, and which is like across the South Asia without the border. We have the same culture, and in fact it goes into southern part of Asia also, in Thailand, and similar kind of vocabulary exists in those in other countries also. And when it came, so like Sunil was saying that about cruising, so very much what he said about the red jacket and in passing information, that was also, that's the kind of beginning of a very ephemeral form of activism, so to speak, or community building or activism. Like you can look out for somebody who's like harassing maybe in cruising spaces or attacking people, or there's a call, and then began discussions about HIV and AIDS and how do you access condoms, or is it is it important to have condoms or not, or how do we have discussions about basically safe sex. So I started this organization in the late 90s and worked with this organization, primarily working with Kothis, as I said, but into the early 2000s, that whole identity, when the funding came from UN organization, that became MSM. So you no longer have this word that existed, and you have, you adopted that identity. You are this acronym MSM, which stands for Men Who Have Sex with Men. And very often, and soon after it became noun. So people who started saying that I am Charan Singh and I am MSM, rather than thinking about, and that whole conversation until this point of time, existed in English language. So one of the things that I talked about in this film is that you see that there are 3 glossaries that kind of like as a kind of like door stopper about this unsettling definitions of things, which the knowledge that is produced by primarily US about in this context is no longer kind of works for people like me who are now have crossed that portal of English language. I'm seeing myself from the other side now through English lens, because what has been written about me or people like me. So, and in this film, basically there are these moments where, first of all, that there are this idea of desire and sexuality and body, and how the body is sort of also, and I think we both of us didn't knew at that time when the first person who was talking about this movie Splash, I also didn't knew, but I didn't realize that we both have seen that movie Splash, where, what's the name? Harold, the Splash movie with Tom Hanks. Daryl Hannah, and they were talking about that. Basically, we were both talking about the same thing, that there is a body, there's a female, there's a woman inside the body, and all of that. And then the third sequence, which is primarily about HIV and AIDS, where people are getting up every day and thinking about how do you live with HIV and AIDS, because there is no other context, and you only exist in that context. You don't have any other, like as Sunil was saying, that still there's a large population of India in South Asia. They don't have access to that gay culture. And they have their own culture. That culture doesn't translate, and very often they're misrepresented or mistranslated.
So you have to discuss that. So there's the big class divide.
Yeah.
We haven't mentioned it yet. So we're separated by a class. We literally are, the two of us also, separated by this class divide. So I grew up gay in a way I don't think you could have grown up.
No.
You didn't have that identity.
No.
Possibility of being gay. You could only be a Kothi, which signifies underclass, femme boys who sell their bodies for sex, in a cross-dressed kind of manner.
Sometimes cross-dressed, sometimes but it's the idea, I think, also that like there has been always like many way of being men, and because the identity and masculinity is also not defined as in the Western context, very often when you see very early images of Buddha, for instance, it's not chiseled body, but now when you see even the god and goddesses, they are all like almost have this body of David, the Greek body. So there is that also, that kind of like porous, the identity of the basically masculinity is very porous.
I'm wondering if somehow the communication, that the popular culture being so post-war one, being so American as opposed to British or anything else.
Yeah.
For South Asia, that I first heard the word gay from the Berkeley Bar, the student paper from San Francisco, which had ads for gay. I thought, oh, that's gay.
Mm.
And so that's how that entered my kind of consciousness. And I think that, so everything kind of like comes that way. And so there's a real problem because I was saying with MSM, it was invented in Geneva by UNAIDS to describe a group of people who are largely Muslim, actually, from Morocco to Indonesia. India just fell in the way, where there were a bunch of people who weren't Muslim, but they also became. And it literally came to India from here, through NAS Foundation.
Yeah.
A guy from London went to Delhi and started an AIDS NGO and started MSM and argued for Koti to be the equivalent Indian gay.
Yeah.
But middle-class Indian gays like
They didn't want it to
Salim
be.
and myself were saying, hang on a minute, we're not Kotis. We're educated middle-class, cisgendered males. We have no desire to be in a sari and be beaten up by somebody. I know?
Yeah, I mean, it's incredibly complicated, and I think what's interesting about your work is also how it expands the conversation. While it is very much within the kind of queer context, it also kind of points toward how the issue of HIV/AIDS in South Asia is not an LGBT one,
no.
But because of the dominant narrative, the Western narrative, it is seen and stigmatized the same way.
Yeah.
But in Pakistan, for instance, due to a lack of kind of healthcare and kind of precaution, entire villages of children are kind of infected with HIV.
Oh yeah, totally.
And so I'm sure that happens in India as well.
Yes.
And so it is very much linked with poverty as well,
Yeah.
and the global South.
Because all the Kotis are married and have children. That's a given.
Yeah, and so it's I guess, I think when I was thinking of including your work, it was also about kind of thinking about how Jose Esteban Munoz has written how queerness is not yet here.
Yeah.
And I think when we talk about queerness and we're kind of framing that in an exhibition, it's also about pointing towards horizons that are yet to be explored. I wouldn't say discovered, because they exist, they have existed for a long time. And so when we're talking about queerness, it's not really, and the inclusion of quote-unquote voices from elsewhere, it's not about necessarily including them into the queer conversation here, but allowing them to challenge what queerness can be here.
Yeah, exactly.
And so that's the idea of kind of opening up these kind of conversations, and I hope that will kind of extend.
But one of the things, what's interesting I find in a more contemporary way is that in the West we've arrived at this moment, which feels more like gender queer moment to me, where, after some fluidity now, like, it's quite normalized for people to be whatever gender and whatever time in their life that they want to be, etc. And so, but this is a discussion that South Asia can bring a very complicated history to, which is hardly been touched. I've never seen it anywhere. But our whole tradition is about X having sex with Y, X changing, one God changing gender to have a baby with another God, and the product could be half human, half not. Like we have this very complicated history and traditions, and on the front door of almost every Indian household is Ganesh, who's half elephant and half man, and everybody thinks that's perfectly fine. They don't think it's weird, no? So I think the possibility for us to contribute now is quite good, but we sort of untapped.
Yeah, but on that note, maybe I'll open up to the audience, and then we can organically flow back into just socializing. But are there any questions from the audience, or do we want to flow organically as well. Just to say that, unfortunately Sunil and Charan will have to leave early tomorrow, but we'll have the opportunity to engage with Phyllis and Stuart at a panel discussion in Northumbria tomorrow. So that's an opportunity to also come to and speak to them, hear about their work. But yeah, for tonight you have Sunil and Charan here as well. So make the most of it. With that, I'll just kind of go back into mingling. Thank you everyone for listening.